Park Jung's hands went still on the steering wheel. Not because of the traffic, not because of the red light stretching long and lazy across Wilshire Boulevard. His hands went still because of the girl in his rearview mirror, the small, brown-skinned child in a yellow school uniform sitting in the third row of his bus, clutching a sealed yellow envelope so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. He had seen that seal before. He had used that seal before. And the last man who held an envelope like that never made it home. Before we go any further, drop in the comments right now. What time is it where you are, and are you watching this alone or with someone? Because trust me, you are going to want to witness for what is about to unfold. Let's get into it. The bus smelled like diesel and cheap air freshener pine trees hanging from a mirror that used to hold something much heavier. Park Jung had driven this route for 8 months. Same streets, same turns. Same children with their loud laughter and forgotten backpacks. He knew every pothole on this road, every crossing guard, every cracked sidewalk between here and the elite West Side Academy, where the wealthiest families in Los Angeles sent their children to learn things their parents already paid people to do for them. He fit in perfectly. That was the point. The polyester uniform was 2 sizes too large. He wore no watch, no ring, no trace of the man he used to be. His hair was cut plain. His jaw stayed slack. His eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes that had once made grown men sweat through their suits in Seoul boardrooms, those eyes he kept low, soft, forgettable. Until today. Because today, Nia was on his bus. Nia, his maid, Rita's daughter, 7 years old, quiet as smoke. The child he had never once seen in his home, never once heard through the walls of his Los Feliz mansion, because Rita had kept her hidden with a discipline that, in another life, he would have admired as tactical genius. 8 months under his roof, and he had never known she existed. That alone should have alarmed him sooner. But it was the envelope that rewired every instinct in his body. He adjusted the rearview mirror slightly, just enough so that his face stayed angled away from her line of sight, just enough to keep watching. She hadn't looked up once. She sat with her back pressed flat against the brown leather seat, both arms wrapped around that envelope like it was the only solid thing left in her world. Her braids were neat. Her yellow dress matched the envelope almost exactly, and something about that symmetry made his stomach tighten in a way he could not explain. She was scared. Not the way children get scared of the dark, or of a loud sound that fades. This was something older than her years, a fear that had been taught to her, quietly, carefully, over time. He recognized it because he had spent decades teaching that same fear to people twice her age. The light turned green. He drove. Outside, Los Angeles blurred past in its usual indifferent motion, food trucks and luxury SUVs and joggers who had nowhere to be but acted like they did. The afternoon sun hit the smog at an angle that turned everything gold, the way this city always tried to make ugly things look beautiful. Jung kept his breathing even, his jaw loose, his hands steady at 10 and 2. But his mind was already moving. The seal on that envelope was not from this city. It was not from this country. It was a blood-red wax stamp pressed into a family crest that existed in exactly 3 places in the world, 2 of which were now ashes, and the third was a name he had erased from his memory the night he boarded a one-way flight to America and told himself he was done. The Golden Dragon Syndicate did not send letters. They sent messages. And they always chose the most innocent hand available to carry them. Rain began to tap against the windshield, soft at first, then insistent, the way a truth sounds when it finally decides it is tired of being ignored. Jung reached forward and turned the wipers on slow. Through the smear of water and glass, he watched the street ahead, and in the reflection of the mirror, he watched her. Nia hadn't moved, but her eyes had shifted just once to the back of his head, and in that single glance, he saw something that no 7-year-old should carry behind her eyes. She wasn't just scared. She was waiting. Like she already knew something was coming. Like she had been bracing for it long before she ever stepped onto this bus. Her small fingers pressed the envelope tighter to her chest, and her chin lifted just slightly proud, almost defiant, and for the first time in 8 months, Park Jung felt the careful, quiet life he had built begin to fracture at the edges. Whatever was inside that envelope had already found him. The only question left was what it would cost to keep that little girl alive long enough to find out. And that is where this story begins. To understand what that envelope meant to Park Jung, you have to go back to who he was before the uniform, before the bus, before Los Angeles. You have to go back to Seoul. Sol had taught Park Jung many things: how to read a room before entering it, how to hear a lie 3 sentences before it was spoken, how to watch a person without letting them know they were being watched. But nothing Sol ever taught him had prepared him for the specific, hollow silence of a mansion that had been hiding a child for 8 months. He pulled into the circular driveway just after 5. The evening air was thick with jasmine from the hedgerow. Rita trimmed every Thursday, always Thursday, never a day late, never a day early. He had noticed that precision about her from the beginning. Precision was either the mark of a professional or the mark of someone with something to protect. He had assumed it was the former. He was beginning to understand it was both. The house settled around him as he stepped inside. Marble floors, high ceilings that caught sound and held it, a kitchen that smelled faintly of ginger and sesame from whatever Rita had left warming on the stove. Everything in its place, everything exactly as it should be, except the envelope. He had taken it from the bus after Nia stepped off. She hadn't protested, she had only looked at him once, those large dark eyes holding something ancient and careful, like she was deciding whether or not he was worth trusting. Then she had let go. And that surrender, a 7-year-old releasing her grip on the most dangerous thing in the room, sat in his chest now like a stone he couldn't swallow. He set the envelope on his study desk without opening it. Not yet. First, he needed to understand how it got here. He found Rita in the service wing. She didn't hear him coming. She never did. She was always moving, always doing, her hands in perpetual, graceful motion. A woman who seemed to have learned long ago that stillness was a luxury she could not afford. Tonight she was folding linens, her dark brown fingers smoothing each crease with an almost meditative focus, her back to the door, her shoulders carrying a tension she tried to hide inside the efficiency of her movements. She was tall. He had always registered that, taller than most women he knew, with a posture that came not from arrogance, but from something quieter and more difficult to name. Endurance, perhaps. The particular elegance of a woman who had been through something and decided not to let it break her shape. Her locks were pinned up tonight, a few loose pieces curling against the nape of her neck, and the lamplight caught the warm undertone of her skin in a way that made the room feel smaller somehow, more intimate than it had any right to be. He said her name once, quietly. She turned, and in that half-second before her expression settled into composure, he saw it. A flicker, not guilt, not fear exactly, something sharper, more complicated. The look of a woman who had been running a very careful calculation and had just discovered one of her variables had changed. Mr. Park. Her voice was steady, low, melodic, controlled the voice of someone who had practiced remaining calm inside conversations designed to unsettle her. He held up the envelope. The composure held, barely. "Where," he said, not a question, a coordinate, "is your daughter?" Rita's chin lifted. That same instinct Nia had shown on the bus ride as a first line of defense, before strategy had time to assemble. For 3 full seconds she said nothing, and in those seconds the room between them felt like a wire pulled too tight. Then she moved past him, not fleeing, leading. Head up, shoulders back, her steps deliberate down the corridor that led to the service basement, a space he had not entered once since purchasing this home. He followed. Of course he followed. The stairs were narrow. The light was a single bulb on a pull chain that swayed gently when Rita tugged it, casting everything in a warm amber that softened the concrete walls and turned the makeshift room beyond into something almost tender. A cot with a yellow blanket, a stack of books, English and French, 2 languages for a child not yet 8. Drawings pinned to the wall with careful precision, cityscapes, animals, and one that stopped young cold, a yellow school bus rendered in crayon, with a figure behind the wheel that had been given, deliberately, a black suit, and no face. Nia was not there. Rita had moved her before showing him this room. That was not panic, that was planning. He turned to look at Rita, and she was already watching him. Arms folded across her chest, jaw set, a woman presenting herself to a reckoning she had known was coming and had decided not to beg through. "She witnessed something," Rita said, "at the docks, 3 months ago. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to trust." A pause, then quieter. "I still don't." The last sentence was not a confession. It was a warning. He looked at the child's drawing again, at the faceless man behind the wheel, and he felt something shift inside him, something that had been dormant for a long time, something that didn't have a clean name in any language he spoke. He should have told her to pack her things. He should have had them out of this house before midnight. Instead, he reached up and turned off the swaying bulb. And in the dark, he said, "She stays. You both stay. But starting tonight, Rita, no more secrets." She didn't answer immediately, and the silence she gave him in return was the most complicated thing he had heard in years. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known in that moment, was that Rita had already decided, 3 months ago, exactly which secret she was never going to tell him. He opened the envelope at 2 a.m. Not because he wanted to, because his body had refused to sleep, refused to do anything except sit in his study with the bourbon he poured and never touched, and wait for the courage or the foolishness. He was no longer sure of the difference to look at what was inside. The study was his truest room. Dark wood and low lamp light, bookshelves holding volumes in 3 languages, a single window overlooking the garden that was silver and still under the moon. He had designed this room to feel like a vault, impenetrable, controlled, sealed off from everything that had come before. Tonight it felt like a confession booth. The seal cracked under his thumb with a sound like a knuckle popping. Inside, 40 pages of handwritten ledger entries, columns of names, dates, account numbers, transaction codes, and coordinates. The penmanship was angular and precise, each character formed with the unhurried confidence of someone who believed what they were writing would outlast them. He recognized that handwriting before the first line was finished. It was his. Not similar, not reminiscent, his down to the particular pressure he applied to the downstroke of certain characters, the slight leftward lean he had developed at 17 and never corrected. He turned the page, and the next, 10 years of transactions, annotated in his own hand, chronicling movements and exchanges he had ordered during the 3 years he served as the operational head of the Golden Dragon Syndicate's Western Pacific Division. Transactions that were supposed to have burned in a warehouse fire in Busan on a Tuesday in March, 11 years ago. He remembered that fire with a completeness that bordered on physical. He remembered standing 2 kilometers away on a rain-soaked dock, watching the column of smoke climb into a sky the color of a bruise, and feeling for the first and only time in his adult life something adjacent to relief. The records were gone. The evidence was ash. He could move forward without that weight dragging behind him. Except the records were not gone. Someone had been in that warehouse before the fire. Someone had taken the ledger, preserved it, and held it for 11 years without using it. That was not theft. That was leverage, banked and aging like a bottle of something lethal, saved for exactly the right moment to uncork. And the right moment, apparently, was now. He set the pages down, stood, crossed to the window. Outside, the garden was immaculate, Rita's work. 3 mornings a week, her hands moving through the soil with the same focused grace she brought to everything. He had watched her once from this window without meaning to, watched the way she knelt and worked, the morning light building slowly around her like the day was being constructed specifically to illuminate her, and he had turned away from the window with a discipline that cost him more than he wanted to admit. He turned away now from a different kind of cost. If the ledger was here, in this city, in the hands of a child, it meant the Golden Dragon knew where he was. It meant the 11 years of careful, deliberate anonymity were not anonymity at all. They had been watched. He had been allowed to run, the way a man allows something to reach the end of a long rope before pulling it back. But why use Nia? Why not come directly? He returned to the desk, read the final page of the ledger. And there, in the bottom corner of the last entry, written not in his hand but in a tight, economical script he did not immediately recognize, were 4 words in Korean. She already knows everything. He read it 3 times. She, not Nia. Nia was 7. 7-year-olds knew what they witnessed. They did not know everything. The pronoun wasn't pointing at the child. His mind moved to Rita, to the basement room, to the way she had led him down those stairs without hesitation, like a woman presenting evidence she had already organized, to the way her expression controlled, measured, giving him only what she chose to give, had carried that one flicker he couldn't name. He crossed the study to the door. Stopped. From somewhere down the hall came the soft sound of movement, a chair, the faint clink of a glass. Someone else was awake in this house at 2 a.m. He should have gone back to his desk. He should have kept his distance, kept the professional geometry between himself and his employee intact, kept the careful inches of appropriate space that made everything inside these walls manageable. His hand was already on the door handle. Down the hall, the kitchen light was on a warm rectangle spilling gold across the dark floor. And standing at the counter, back to him, her silk house robe the deep green of something living, her locks loose now and falling past her shoulders, was Rita, a cup of something warm between her palms. Her reflection faint in the dark window above the sink. She knew he was there. He could see it in the stillness that passed through her, not a freeze, not alarm, but the particular quality of awareness a person has when they feel themselves being watched by someone whose attention matters. She didn't turn around. "You opened it," she said. Not a question. "Yes." A pause. Her reflection in the window shifted just her eyes, moving to find his in the glass. "Then you have questions," she said. "One," he replied. "Just one for now." She set the cup down. Slowly. Her fingers left it with the deliberateness of someone setting down the last thing between themselves and an answer they had rehearsed. She turned, and the lamplight caught her face fully composed, and beneath the composure, something raw and tired and brave. The face of a woman who had been carrying a very specific weight for a very long time, and had finally decided, perhaps, that she was done carrying it alone. "Ask," she said. "How long have you known who I really am?" The pause she gave him then was not the pause of someone searching for words. It was the pause of someone deciding which version of the truth they were finally willing to speak out loud. And the version she chose was not the one he had expected. It was so much worse. She had known for 4 years. Not from the moment she arrived, not from the first week. When she was learning where he kept the spare keys and how he took his coffee, and which hours of the morning were safe to move through the house without disturbing the particular silence he wrapped around himself like armor. She had known from the night she found the photograph. It was taped to the inside back cover of a Korean English dictionary on the lowest shelf of the study, the kind of hiding place a man chooses, not because it's clever, but because he is certain no one who works for him will ever reach for a dictionary. She had reached for it. Not out of snooping. She had been looking for a word she needed for the naturalization form she was completing at the kitchen table on a slow Sunday. She pulled out the book. It fell open, and the photo slid into her hand like it had been waiting. 2 men, young, arms around each other in the careless way of people who believe nothing between them will ever break. One of them was Park Jung, 20-something, jaw still sharp but eyes not yet fully shuttered, a trace of something open in his expression that she had never once seen on the man who signed her paychecks. The other man in the photograph was her husband. She told him this now, quietly, standing in his kitchen, lamp casting amber across her collarbone, her voice carrying the weight of someone who has practiced this conversation so many times inside their own mind that the real version feels almost like a dream. Jung said nothing. His stillness had a texture to it dense, absolute, the stillness of a man whose body has stopped in order to let his mind do the work of surviving what it is hearing. Her husband's name was David Osei. He had been an undercover operative, embedded in the Golden Dragon's logistics network for 2 years when his cover was compromised. She had never been told exactly how. She had been told only that he died in the field, that the manor was classified, and that she was entitled to a folded flag and a phone number that rang 4 times and disconnected. What she knew, what she had pieced together in the years since, in the careful, patient way of a woman whose grief had converted itself into precision, was that David had been trying to reach Jung the night he died, that there had been a message, that the message never arrived, and that the man who was supposed to receive it had, within 48 hours, boarded a plane and disappeared entirely from a world that had been looking for him ever since. She had not come here to kill him. She needed him to understand that. She had come here, had engineered her presence in his house, his life, his orbit because David had trusted this man above all others, and she needed to know why. She needed to know if that trust was deserved or catastrophic. She needed to know if her husband had died for something, or because of someone. Jung's jaw moved, stopped. He looked at his hands on the countertop, both palms flat against the marble, as if he needed something solid beneath him to continue standing. "I got the message," he said finally. His voice was low, stripped of everything except the truth. 2 hours too late. Rita closed her eyes. 1 breath in, 1 breath out. The mathematics of grief, quick, private, done. When she opened her eyes, he was looking at her, and the expression on his face was not the armored blankness she had catalogued over months of proximity. It was something unguarded and painful, the face of a man confronting a debt he has never found a way to repay. "I tried," he said. "I need you to know I tried." "I know," she said. And the terrible, complicated thing was that she did know. The knowing didn't make it clean. It made it worse in a different way, the particular devastation of a wound that has no villain, only timing, only the relentless indifference of moments arriving too late. The distance between them in the kitchen was not large. 4 feet, perhaps, the kind of distance that requires a decision to cross. Neither of them moved, and the stillness vibrated with everything being held carefully in place: grief, history, the long, complicated architecture of how they had arrived in this room, this moment, this specific, impossible proximity. She noticed, the way she had been quietly noticing for months against her own better judgment, the way the lamplight fell across his face, the line of his jaw, the scar below his left ear she had never asked about, the way his hands, which she knew were capable of terrible things, were pressing against the marble with a pressure that looked almost like supplication. He noticed her. She felt it the way you feel a change in barometric pressure, a shift in the room's atmosphere rather than anything she could point to directly. His eyes moved from hers, briefly, and she felt the specific warmth of being seen by someone who had been trying, very deliberately, not to see her. Rita. Her name in his mouth was different from how he usually said it, more careful, lower. She reached for her cup, a thing to hold, a reason to look away. "The ledger," she said, pulling the room back to safer ground. "Naya didn't find it by accident. Someone put it in her path, someone who knew I would be here, someone who knew that you—" She stopped, because the window above the sink, the dark window she had been watching her own reflection in, had just reflected something it should not have. A shape, beyond the garden wall, still, watching. Jung saw it at the same moment. She knew because his hand moved slowly, controlled to the counter's edge, the professional in him assembling in real time, the armor sliding back into place. "Don't look at the window," he said quietly. "Walk to the hallway. Get Nia. Do it now." She didn't ask questions. She set the cup down, turned from the room, and moved. And as she passed him in the narrow kitchen corridor, close enough that she could feel the warmth that came off him, close enough that his breath shifted when she was near, she stopped, for just 1 second, and she said very quietly into the space between them, "I don't know yet if I trust you." "I know," he said. "Go." She went, and he stayed. And whatever stood beyond the garden wall had no idea what it had just walked into range of. Morning came the way bad days always do, quietly, without warning, dressed like something ordinary. Young had not slept. He had moved through the house instead, checking every point of entry with the systematic thoroughness of a man who had once trained others to do this and never fully unlearned the habit. The shape beyond the garden wall had not returned, or it had been too disciplined to return visibly. He understood the distinction. Presence and visibility were not the same thing, and whoever had placed that lookout was not operating at the amateur level. By 6, he had a plan. By 6:15, Nia was awake. He heard her before he saw her small footsteps on the kitchen tile. Deliberate and light, the specific sound of a child who has learned to move through spaces without being heard. She appeared in the doorway in yellow pajamas, her braids slightly loosened from sleep, her dark eyes moving from the room to him with that same measured caution he had catalogued on the bus. She didn't startle. She didn't speak. She simply looked at him the way she always looked at him, like she was reading something written behind his face that he didn't know was visible. He crouched to her eye level. "Good morning, Nia." "Good morning, Mr. Park." Precise, formal, Rita's daughter entirely. "I need you to do something for me today. I need you to stay inside. No windows. You understand?" She studied him. Then, "Is my mom okay?" "Your mom is fine. She's upstairs." Another pause. Then Nia reached into the kangaroo pocket of her pajama top and produced a folded piece of paper. She held it out to him. He took it, unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing his bus, rendered in the crayon realism of a child who pays close attention to things adults think children miss. And inside the bus, 2 figures, one behind the wheel, suited, faceless as before, and one in the passenger seat, a woman, dark-skinned, tall, locks drawn in careful swooping lines. Beside the woman, a small girl in yellow. All 3 in the same frame. He looked up at Nia. She was watching him with an expression he could not fully categorize, ancient and unhurried. A patience that did not belong to her age. "I drew us going somewhere safe," she said. Simply, matter-of-factly, the way a child states a thing they have decided is already true. He folded the drawing back along its creases and placed it in his breast pocket. He didn't know why. He did it without deciding to. At 7:45, he drove the bus. This was the part of the plan that required the most control, maintaining the appearance of an unbroken routine while dismantling everything underneath it. He drove the familiar route with the familiar children, counting the streets, watching the mirrors. Nothing moved wrong for the first 20 minutes. Then he saw the second bus. It was identical, same model, same yellow, same city route number on the placard above the windshield. He first registered it 3 streets back. By the second block, it was 2 cars closer. By the third, it was 1, and the driver, visible in the exterior mirror, was wearing the same polyester uniform he wore. Same color, same cut. Jung's hands stayed perfectly still on the wheel. His breathing stayed even. Around him, 8 children talked about things. Children talk about a cartoon, a game, a small injustice from yesterday, and none of them noticed the way the muscles in their driver's forearms had gone hard as cable. He thought about the ledger, about the 4 words in the corner, about the shape beyond the garden wall, about the careful architecture of everything that had converged on this house, this bus, this morning, not chaotically but precisely, with the structured intentionality of someone who had planned multiple moves in advance. They were not here for him. The realization arrived complete, without needing to be assembled. The bus behind him, the lookout, the ledger transported by a child, none of it was about catching him. If they wanted him, they would have moved months ago, years ago. He had been in the same city long enough. They knew where he slept. They wanted the ledger, and they had allowed Nia to bring it to him because they needed him to open it. They needed him to see what was inside before they took it back, which meant what was inside had a secondary function he hadn't identified yet. He turned left at an intersection he was not supposed to turn at. The children noticed. One asked, cheerfully, if he was lost. "Detour," he said. Calm, certain. The yellow bus behind him turned left as well. He had 7 minutes before any parent noticed the route deviation and began calling the school. 7 minutes to get 8 children off this bus and into a location the second driver could not follow without exposure. He knew this neighborhood. He had walked it once, months ago. The way he walked every neighborhood within 3 miles of anywhere he spent regular time, a habit, an insurance policy, a reflex he had never managed to retire. The community center on Brentford, open at 7, staffed, public, visible. He pulled into the lot, opened the doors, told the children they were taking an unscheduled stop, smile in his voice, total ease in his posture, and watched them file out with the oblivious trust that children extend to adults who seem certain of things. He waited until they were inside. Then he turned. The second bus had parked at the lot entrance, blocking exit, not approach. Deliberate, calculated. The driver had stepped out and was standing at the front of the vehicle, not advancing, simply standing, hands visible, looking at Jung across 40 feet of morning air. And Jung looked back. The driver reached into his jacket, slowly, and produced not a weapon but an envelope, the same yellow, the same red seal, held up for Jung to see, then placed on the hood of the second bus with a deliberate gentleness that was not an offering. It was a confirmation. They were telling him they had another copy, that the ledger Nia had carried was never the only one. It was a test, a key designed to open something in him rather than expose something about them. They had needed him to read his own handwriting. They had needed him to remember exactly what he had done and exactly what it was worth. Now they were confirming it not to threaten him, but to show him they already held everything. Then the driver turned, got back in, and drove away. Jung stood in the empty bus lot as the sound of the engine faded, 8 children safe behind glass doors behind him, and the absolute certainty settling cold and clear through his chest. This wasn't a warning. This was an invitation, and someone back at the mansion was alone. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. 1 message, 3 words in Korean. "Go home, Park." He was already running. He gave Rita 1 hour. Not because he needed the time, he needed it for her. An hour to settle, to breathe, to allow the revelation to find its place in the architecture of everything she had been carrying. He understood grief's bureaucracy, the administrative weight of rearranging what you thought you knew. He gave her the hour and spent it in the study, not reading, not planning, simply sitting with the particular kind of stillness that arrives when a man realizes the ground he built his new life on was never solid to begin with. At 9 o'clock, he went to find her. She was in the sitting room, not a space she ordinarily used, which told him she had chosen it deliberately, for its distance from Nia's earshot and its wide windows that kept her visible from multiple angles. A woman who understood sightlines. He noted that. He noted everything now with a precision he had deliberately let dull over years of polyester uniforms and school bus fumes, and it was all coming back online with the cold efficiency of something that had only ever been sleeping. She stood when she heard him. The lamplight in the room was low and warm, doing things to the green silk she wore that he filed away in a locked compartment he was not yet prepared to open. She had let her locks down again. They fell across her shoulders in loose, heavy coils, framing a face that was composed and exhausted and, underneath both of those things, watching him with an attention that matched his own. The sitting room had a fireplace. Someone had lit it earlier, Rita, he assumed, the way she always managed the house's small comforts as if maintaining them was part of remaining sane. The fire did what fire does. Softened the edges of the room, made the distance between people feel simultaneously safer and more dangerous. They talked for 40 minutes. She told him about David's final months, the growing certainty that his cover was compromised, the coded messages she had received that she hadn't fully understood until after his death, the agency handler who had stopped returning calls 3 days before the night everything ended. She told him about finding the photograph, about the 2 years it had taken her to locate Young, and the additional 6 months it had taken to engineer a reason to be inside this house. She was precise, chronological. She delivered it with the flat affect of someone who has debriefed themselves so many times that the emotional content has been processed separately and stored elsewhere. He listened without interrupting. He had learned long ago that the space you give a person to speak is often more revealing than the questions you ask. When she finished, the fire had dropped to embers. "You're not just David's widow," he said. She looked at him. "You were trained," he said. "Not an accusation, a recognition. The way you move through this house, the sightlines you chose for this room, the fact that you have been here 8 months and I never once found an edge in your story that's not a civilian's discipline." Her chin lifted. The composure didn't waver, but something behind it shifted the faintest recalibration of a person deciding how much to confirm. "David wasn't the only one the agency recruited from our family," she said. He felt the room rearrange itself around that sentence. And then his hearing, which had always been his most reliable instrument, sharper than his eyes in darkness, sharper than his instincts in silence, caught something. Faint, rhythmic. A frequency hovering at the edge of perception, the specific electromagnetic hum of a transmission device operating close to its range limit. He did not move, did not change his expression, did not allow a single muscle in his face to perform what his mind was now doing at high speed. He stood, slowly, and crossed to the fireplace as if to add a log. In the process, he moved within 2 feet of her. The warmth between them was not only from the embers. He could feel her breathing adjust the involuntary response of someone whose body is conducting a different conversation from the one their mind is managing, and he took no satisfaction in it, only noted it the way he noted everything, as data that told him she was still human underneath the training, still affected, despite every professional reason not to be. He reached past her. His hand brushed her shoulder, deliberate, unavoidable in the space, and in the half-second of contact he felt it. The faint, rigid outline beneath the silk at her ribcage. Not a weapon. The rectangular weight of a transmission device, small and flat and damning. He stepped back. She knew he had found it. He could see it in the way her shoulders dropped, not in defeat, not in panic, but in the particular release of a person who has been bracing for a moment that has finally arrived. "How long?" he asked. 3 weeks. Her voice was steady, barely. "Who holds the other end?" "The same people who sent the bus." A pause. "They have someone I cannot lose." He looked at her. She looked back. The fire gave one last slow pulse of light across her face, fierce, tired, honest in the way only people who have run out of options tend to be honest, and he understood, completely and without sentimentality, exactly what this moment was. She was not his enemy. She was something far more complicated, a person trapped in the space between 2 loyalties, doing the only thing available to her, which was survive. He crossed to the door, checked the corridor, came back. "Take it off," he said quietly, Put it in the kitchen drawer, still transmitting. Then come back. We have approximately 40 minutes before they realize you have stopped feeding them useful information." He paused. "And Rita?" She was already moving, but she stopped. "Whoever they're holding," he said. "We're getting them back." She turned to look at him. For the first time since he had known her, the composure came apart entirely, not dramatically, not in tears, just in the sudden, unbearable openness of a face that has finally allowed itself to be seen without armor. It lasted only a second. Then she reassembled, turned, and walked toward the kitchen with the quiet, purposeful grace of a woman who had just decided which side of a war she was willing to die on. The wire went into the kitchen drawer at 9:47. By 10, the room had changed its nature entirely, no longer surveilled, no longer a stage, now simply a space where two people who had stopped performing for an audience could finally think out loud. Nia was asleep. Jung had checked twice. She was on the basement cot, yellow blanket pulled to her chin, her sketchbook closed on the floor beside her, the charcoal pencil still loosely held in her small fingers, even in sleep. A child who created even when she wasn't trying to, whose hands remembered what her mind released. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer than necessary. He did not examine why. He returned to the study. Rita followed, and this too had changed the way she moved through his space. No longer the careful periphery of an employee, but something more direct, more willing to occupy the room as an equal. She pulled a chair to the desk without being invited. He noticed, said nothing. He placed the ledger between them. "Walk me through what David told you," he said. "Everything, even the parts that seemed irrelevant." She had a good memory. Better than good, the architectural kind, the kind that files information in retrievable sequences rather than impressionistic fragments. She spoke for 20 minutes. He listened with his full attention, which was a considerable thing to give a person, and she seemed to register its weight because she gave him the same quality in return, no omissions, no softening, every detail offered with the precision of someone who understood that precision was now the only currency that mattered. When she finished, he opened the ledger to the final page, pointed to the 4 words in the corner. She read them, her jaw tightened. "David wrote that," she said. He looked at her. He had access to the ledger for 48 hours before he died. He was the one who moved it out of the Busan warehouse before the fire. Her eyes moved across the page, steady, piecing something together in real time. "He wrote that note for you. He knew you'd eventually see it. He knew you'd understand it was about me." Jung leaned back. The lamp above the desk lit the angles of his face in a way that made him look, briefly, like the man in Rita's recovered photograph, younger, more uncertain, not yet fully armored. She looked at him the way you look at a version of someone you have studied only in retrospect, trying to reconcile the archived image with the present one. "He trusted you to keep us safe," she said, quietly, without accusation. "I know," he said. The weight of it was not new. It had simply never had a face before. He reached for the ledger, and then he stopped. Something Naya had said on their first morning together dropped into the conversation with the throwaway casualness of a child stating something that was simply true, surfaced now with a clarity that felt almost violent. He crossed to the basement without explanation, retrieved Nia's worn yellow teddy bear from the corner of the cot, careful, precise, not disturbing the child's sleep, brought it back to the study, placed it on the desk between himself and Rita. Rita sat up straighter. She had already seen something in his expression. He turned the bear over. The seam along the back had been restitched recently, with thread that didn't quite match, the stitches slightly uneven in the way of small hands working with adult tools. He reached for the letter opener, made a careful incision along the original seam, reached inside. His fingers found it before his eyes confirmed it. A microchip, barely the size of a fingernail, encased in a thin strip of waterproof polymer, the kind used for field data storage. He set it on the desk under the lamp, and they both looked at it in silence for a long moment. "She sewed it in herself," Rita said. Her voice had lost its professional surface entirely. What remained was the raw, unmediated voice of a mother. "She is 7 years old, and she sewed a microchip into her teddy bear." "She is David's daughter," Jung said, simply. Rita pressed her fingers to her mouth, composed herself by force of will. When she lowered her hand, her eyes were bright but her voice was steady. He crossed to his laptop, bypassed 3 layers of security with the unhurried fluency of someone who had designed exactly this contingency, connected the chip via a field adapter from the desk drawer. The drive mounted. He opened the directory. What loaded was not the syndicate's transaction records. What loaded was a complete and encrypted mapping of the Golden Dragon's current offshore financial architecture, $11 billion distributed across 43 accounts in 19 countries, all account credentials, all transfer protocols, all current aliases of the men who held them. Names he recognized. Names that would mean nothing to a jury without the access codes that accompanied them. Access codes that were all here. He read the file index twice. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and felt, for the first time in 11 years, something that was not quite hope but was structurally similar to it. This doesn't just expose them, he said. This ends them, completely. Every account frozen simultaneously, every name surfaced, every alias burned in a single upload. Rita was leaning forward, fingers spread flat on the desk, the posture of a woman who had been moving toward this moment for 4 years and was now, finally, within reach of it. "Can you do it?" she asked. "I don't have to," he said. He turned the laptop toward her. On the screen, already composed and addressed by whoever had built this file, David, he understood now, or someone David trusted to finish what he started, was a secure email to 3 federal agencies and 2 international crime bodies. All it needed was to be sent. He built the whole thing, Jung said. He just needed someone to find it. Rita stared at the screen. At her husband's work, assembled in the dark years before his death and carried here inside a child's yellow bear, across an ocean and a decade of grief. To this desk, this moment. Her hand moved to the trackpad. "Wait," Jung said. She looked at him. "Once we send it, they will know immediately. Every operative they have in this city mobilizes within the hour." He paused. "We need to be somewhere else before we press send." She held his gaze. Something passed between them, not a decision exactly, more the shared recognition of 2 people who had arrived at the same conclusion by different roads and were now, for the first time, traveling in the same direction. "How much time do we need?" she asked. 2 hours, he said. "Maybe less." She nodded once, pushed back from the desk, stood, and then she said, without looking at him, moving toward the door, "Jung." His given name, not Mr. Park. Not a title, not a formality, not a distance. His name, in her voice, in this room, at this hour. "Thank you." He didn't answer. There was no answer adequate to what the word was carrying. But he felt it land, and he let it stay. The rain began at midnight. Los Angeles rain was always an event the city never fully believed in it, never prepared for it, received it with the bewildered surprise of a place that had decided long ago that weather was something that happened to other people. The streets darkened and shone, headlights fractured into long gold ribbons on the wet pavement, and the hills above the city disappeared entirely into low cloud, as if the topography itself was withdrawing its consent to be seen. Jung drove. Not the bus. A black SUV registered to a shell company David's file had given him the passwords to access, which meant the car had been part of the plan long before tonight. David had thought of everything. The realization kept arriving in small, incremental waves, each one carrying its own weight of admiration and grief. Rita was in the passenger seat. She had changed into dark clothing, her locks gathered back, her posture the clean, upright calm of someone who has made peace with what is coming. In the back seat, Nia slept across the leather with her yellow blanket pulled up, her teddy bear restitched, the microchip now copied to a secure cloud server, and the email staged on a 30-minute delay timer tucked against her chest. She had not woken fully when Jung lifted her from the cot. She had only murmured once, turned her face into the warmth of his shoulder, and gone still again. He had stood there for longer than the situation required. Rita had seen. She had said nothing. They drove for 90 minutes without a tail. The safe house was a property David's network had maintained in the valley, a clean 2-bedroom with utilities on autopay and nothing inside it that connected to any name any of them had ever legally used. He got Naya inside. Rita made tea. Not because the situation called for tea, but because her hands needed to be doing something. And he understood that the intelligence of the body finding its own coping protocols when the mind has run out of approved procedures. He checked the timer on his phone. 18 minutes. They sat at the kitchen table, the tea between them, steam rising in slow curls, the rain against the window. Nia's breathing, audible through the thin wall of the room where she slept. When it sends, Rita said, how long before they trace the origin? The routing is clean. By the time anyone reconstructs the source, the agencies will already have frozen the accounts. The operational funding disappears first. That's the sequence David built in. They cannot mobilize without money, not at the scale they would need to respond. She turned her mug in her hands. And the person they were holding over me? He slid a folded piece of paper across the table. She opened it. An address in Silver Lake. A name, her sister's name, written in his handwriting. She had not asked how he found it. He had not offered. Some things operated on a currency of trust rather than explanation, and they had arrived without ceremony, without announcement at a place where that currency was accepted between them. You did this tonight, she said, while I was putting Nia to bed. I had time during the drive, he said. She looked up. The lamp above the table found her the way light had always found her, with a warmth that seemed deliberate, and her face in it was open in a way he had only seen once before. She had the quality, when the armor was fully down, of someone almost unbearably present, someone who brought their whole self into a room and did not diminish it the way that most people learn. Eventually, to do. I'm sorry, she said, for the wire, for coming here the way I did, for... Stop, he said, gently but finally. She stopped. David sent you, he said. He just sent you early and arranged the rest from the other side. I don't think either of us gets to take credit for how any of this landed. The timer on his phone read 4 minutes. Neither of them spoke. The rain against the window filled the space not uncomfortably, the way silence sometimes does between people who have run out of the energy required to perform, but with the quality of a conclusion finding its natural shape. He thought about the ledger, about the bus, about the yellow envelope in a small girl's white-knuckled hands, the way that single image had cracked open a life he had convinced himself was sealed, about the drawing she had made of him, the face she had given back to him that he thought he'd lost. He thought about the man he used to be, and the man he had quietly been becoming in the spaces between a bus route and an ordinary house, and a woman who managed his garden on Thursday mornings with her hands in the Los Angeles soil like she was anchoring herself to the earth by force of will. His phone buzzed. Sent. He looked at Rita. She was already looking at him, and in her eyes he saw the question she was not asking, deliberate, patient, offered without pressure, the question of a woman who has survived enough to know that the things worth having cannot be taken, only accepted. Then from the other room, without preamble or cause, Nia's voice came clearly through the wall, half asleep, low, unhurried, as if delivering a message from some space between dreaming and waking. Mr. Park, you should stay. The kitchen went very still. Outside, the rain eased its grip on the roof. Inside, the lamp hummed its quiet note above the table. Rita's hands rested around her mug. His rested beside it, and the distance between them held itself in suspension, not asking, not demanding, simply present, the way the most important things tend to be. He reached across the table. His hand settled over hers. Not a claim, not a question, just contact, warm, deliberate, the simplest, honest thing he had done in 11 years. She turned her hand beneath his. Held on. And somewhere in the clean dark of the safe house, with a 7-year-old dreaming behind a thin wall and a decade of damage finally transmitting itself to the people who had earned it, Park Jung, who had been a boss, and then a ghost, and then a man in a polyester uniform pretending to drive children safely through a city that had no idea what moved through it, chose, quietly and without ceremony, to stay. And that is where the story ends, or maybe where it finally begins. If this story held you from the first envelope to the last raindrop, hit that subscribe button right now, because the next chapter of this world is already being written and you do not want to arrive late to it. Drop in the comments what city are you watching from tonight, and tell me, are you Team Rita or are you Team Jung? Because that conversation in the comments is about to get very interesting. Part 2 is coming, and what is waiting for this family on the other side of that sent email is something none of them have calculated for. Stay close. You do not want to miss what happens next.